An elderly man had a lovely property in the middle of town. He really liked it, but some people didn't agree with him owning it. Builders wanted to purchase his house for a long time, but he always said no. They didn't know why he refused, but it all made sense when they went inside his house. This big piece of green land might seem important, but it used to be even bigger. Larry, the owner, used to have all the land around it. It was a pretty place with forests, animals, and rivers, but something bad happened. Larry got that big piece of wild land in the 1960s. He and his family made it into a nice home. But as Larry got older, taking care of all that land became really hard. He wanted nature to take care of itself, but the forest still needed a lot of work, so he had to sell some of it to someone else. The person who bought the land seemed nice. He said he loved nature and promised to protect the land. Larry thought he had found a friend who shared his beliefs, but sadly, it was all a lie. Right after Larry gave the new owner the papers for the land, things started to change. Trees were disappearing and more people in fancy clothes came to the land. When Larry asked, he found out that the new owner sold it to people who wanted to build houses and make money. Larry was very sad. He had made this place special, where his family lived, and now he couldn't stop it from changing because he signed the papers. From that moment, he promised never to sell this last piece of land to anyone, not even friends. As the years passed, the area around Larry's land changed just like he feared. It slowly turned into a city, and a whole town was built where there used to be a peaceful forest. Birds and badgers left the area. By now, Larry was 80 years old, and he could feel that he was getting older. Housing developers kept trying to buy his land and made reasonable offers, but he kept saying no. Then, the developers tried a different approach. Instead of coming in a big group, just a few of them came to his house dressed like regular people. They rang the doorbell, and Larry opened the door. He looked at them and sighed calmly. Larry asked for the men's intent, even though he already knew why they came by. But the way they said it this time made him less defensive. They told Larry that they just wanted to talk in person. Larry grunted 2 times and then invited them inside. Larry walked at a surprisingly fast pace and guided them through the house. He wanted to talk in his study, but that room was in the back of the house. The men peeked into every room they passed on the way over to the study, and with each room they viewed, their eyes widened more. This house was unlike anything they had ever seen. They got more intrigued by the minute, not by the room's beauty, but by how odd they were. Each one of the rooms had a different look that was distinctive and weird in its own way. But there was one thing all rooms in the house had in common. They were all absent from human life. Where was his family? The rooms indicated that more people lived here, but they only saw Larry. Eventually, they entered the study with him and didn't hesitate to ask their one burning question. The old man looked at the ground, clearly searching for the right words, and then said, "There was no family. It was just him, and there had not been any family in this house for many years now." "But what about all those decorated rooms then?" the housing team replied. Larry stepped outside of his study and walked into the newspaper room. From there, he grabbed a dusty and discolored newspaper and showed it to the men in his house. It was an article from decades ago that showed how his family all passed away in a bizarre car accident. "I was the only survivor," Larry continued by saying. "The rooms belonged to my loving family. My wife loved gardening so much that I built her an indoor greenhouse. My young daughter loved the color pink and stuffed bunnies, and my son, who was a science nut, but his room is upstairs, so you have not seen it yet. In all those years, I never changed anything about their rooms. Not one toy or book was moved." The developers had to admit it was a remarkable sight, but it was also clear to them that this man was severely traumatized and clung to every detail from when his family was still alive. Larry let himself fall backward, landing in a creaky old rocking chair, and there he sat, sobbing, looking at old pictures of happier times. He remained silent while the developers talked among themselves. "We cannot take this house from him. That would kill him," one of the men said, whispering. They mumbled while Larry kept staring downward, but then a loud voice arose from the group of men. "I've got it," one of the developers shouted. "I think I have come up with a plan that would satisfy both parties," he said. His fellow employees looked at him, confused, but then he started explaining. He said it was a plan they had in storage for a while, but it was never fully realized. But learning about your past, it just might work. He first of all promised never to build another house on Larry's property again. but he did ask permission to make something else on his land. Larry looked up from his book and gazed, confused at the man explaining. The developer continued speaking and said, the original idea was not to build housing on Larry's large final piece of land. Its central placement in the town made it a perfect spot for a large community park, a place filled with greenery that would connect all surrounding neighborhoods in harmony because that is what fits with this area. The idea brought a broad smile to Larry's face. The atmosphere in Larry's house changed dramatically after that. They agreed and shook hands. Within a year, the town's park was realized, and that fact came with an extra welcome surprise for the now satisfied Larry. At first, the old man was a bit hesitant. The park was stunning and definitely resembled the beauty his forest property had before. But still, he wondered if he had not given up too much. Eventually, he stepped out of his house and walked into the finished park for the first time. But then, after walking around for 10 minutes, he started to relax. The birds and the trees and the squirrels between the dense bushes made him feel at home. Some children played in the back, but their laughter only added to the serenity. But then he felt something bumping against the back of his leg. Larry looked toward the ground and saw that a ball lay beside him. It must be from one of the kids around here, but he did not expect the boy's mom to approach him. The mother smiled as she stepped up to Larry. She introduced herself and said she saw him coming out of the central house. The housing developers made sure that everyone in town knew that Larry was the one who donated his property for the park, and when she saw Larry, she wanted to thank him. The mother said that the park brought her son much happiness. The urban area around the park had little place for him to play outside. For that, I would like to offer you something in return, she said. She worked at the local retirement home, and she assured Larry that she wasn't trying to make him move into a retirement home. Instead, she offered to help him with tasks around his house and take care of his health. This kind and selfless offer made him realize how much bitterness he had been holding onto for years. He agreed, and she was at his doorstep the next day. She made a real difference by helping with chores and providing companionship. Over time, they became good friends, and he started to change the unchanged rooms in his house, which was tough at first, but ultimately lifted a weight from his heart. Larry began to look to the future and heal from his past trauma.